In a busy auto workshop, force is applied against a tightly fixed wheel. Then stored tension suddenly releases and pushes back without warning. On a busy construction platform, a worker walks beneath a long metal pipe. Then the load suddenly drops as its support fails. Cloth truck rushed through the company gate and crushed the security guard. On an industrial rig platform, a suspended line holds under tension until stored energy suddenly releases and the system surges into motion. Inside a busy auto workshop, a van rises on a hydraulic lift when its weight begins to shift off balance. Inside a production line, a roller conveyor runs steadily. Then the moving surface draws anything in contact along its path in an instant. On a construction site, workers climb onto a steel frame to work, while a moving beam enters the same space, creating a sudden strike hazard without warning. At a company gate, a flatbed truck enters the premises when the unsecured load shifts and moves off the side as stability is lost. Inside a construction structure, a partially supported slab holds under load until the surface suddenly gives way and the structure drops without warning. Inside a cramped workshop, equipment builds internal pressure, then a sudden release sends force outward in an instant. Inside a tire workshop, a mounted tire sits under pressure until the casing reaches its limit and releases compressed air energy in an instant. High on a drilling rig platform, a worker steps near the rotating assembly, while a loose SRL line trails into the operating zone of the moving steel. Never, ever allow fall protection lines, or SRLs, to enter the operating zone of rotating machinery. Any loose line can be caught and rapidly drawn into motion. Worker died in explosion at wastewater treatment plant. On a tanker loading platform, a hatch is opened, while the invisible atmosphere inside the tank quietly builds toward a dangerous threshold. Never, ever open, enter, or work over a tank without verifying the atmosphere is safe. Always test, ventilate, and control ignition sources before exposure. Under a heavy truck, a suspension component holds under tension until the connection suddenly releases and the part drops without warning. Inside a chemical storage area, flammable materials sit across the floor when a sudden ignition causes flames to travel quickly along the surface. At the edge of a structure, a sawed-down tree begins to fall, then its weight shifts, moving the center of mass and redirecting the fall path. At a loading dock, a forklift pushes a tall stack onto a truck, while workers stand right beside it. Then the load begins to lean as its center of gravity shifts beyond balance. Do not stand beside or under a raised or unstable load. Always stay clear until the load is fully secured and stable. Deep inside a wastewater treatment facility, pressurized tanks and gas lines operate quietly until a sudden release of stored energy breaks through the system. Never, ever ignore gas monitoring and pressure control inside wastewater treatment plants. In a busy container yard, a reversing container handler begins moving as a blind spot opens behind the machine. At a green light, a truck rolls forward, while unsecured cargo shifts inside the open bed and begins to swing with the motion. Do secure all cargo before a vehicle moves. Do not allow loose or shifting loads inside open transport areas, and verify stability before motion begins. Inside a factory line, an active machine continues cycling, its moving components running continuously without pause. Do isolate and lock out all energy sources before accessing any operating machine. Do not reach into or interact with moving components while the system is active. On an upper floor, loose boards and debris sit at the edge until shifting weight sends a board sliding outward at once. Do secure all loose materials near exposed edges. Do not leave debris or unsecured boards in positions where movement can trigger uncontrolled displacement. In a woodworking shop, a panel glides across a table saw, then a sudden kickback sends the motion sharply backward. In a garage, a raised truck is accessed using ladders for support when a sudden shift in position breaks the stability of the setup. Never, ever use unstable access like ladders as work platforms. Elevated work demands secure, fixed support. On a cluttered factory floor, a running machine draws material through rotating components. When the motion suddenly increases, pulling everything inward at high speed. Do not reach into moving machinery without full shutdown and lockout. Rotation doesn't slow down for reaction time. Inside a tight auto workshop, a car suddenly surges forward without warning, entering a space that appears clear but sits directly in its path of travel. Never, ever stand in the path of a vehicle inside a workshop. Always assume a car can move unexpectedly at any moment. High on a ladder, a worker cuts into a thick limb just as the branch swings back along its rebound path. Do not cut large tree limbs while positioned in their potential swing or rebound path. Between two walls, a worker cuts into a tree while another stands below, unaware the trunk has no clear path to fall and begins to shift unpredictably. Do not cut a tree in a confined space without a clear fall path and escape route. Always control the direction before making the cut. In a cramped factory line, a worker reaches into an operating machine to adjust something while the mechanism is still moving. Never, ever place your hands inside operating machinery without stopping and isolating the equipment first. At a loading dock, workers push a tall, stacked load toward a truck. Then the entire stack suddenly gives way mid-transfer. Never, ever push an unstable or unevenly balanced load onto a truck without proper securing and alignment. High above a construction yard, a crane carries a large bucket platform with workers inside. When the suspended load suddenly drops as its support fails, never, ever transport workers inside lifting buckets or loads not designed for personnel lifting. On a quiet driveway, a van door swings wide open until a sudden gust turns it into a fast-moving hazard. Do not leave vehicle doors unsecured in windy conditions. Always maintain control or latch them properly. On a raised edge, a mini excavator sits on narrow ramps, while one small shift sends the entire machine tipping toward the drop. Never, ever operate or position heavy equipment on unstable or uneven loading ramps. Always ensure full support and secure alignment before movement. At a car wash entrance, a vehicle suddenly surges forward as unintended acceleration occurs in a tight entry zone. Do not rely solely on driver reaction when vehicles operate near pedestrian work zones. On a raised edge, a mini excavator sits on narrow ramps, while one small shift sends the entire machine tipping toward the drop. Never, ever operate or position heavy equipment on unstable or uneven loading ramps. Always ensure full support and secure alignment before movement. Workers stand on a crane climbing platform when the tower suddenly loses stability. Never, ever perform tower crane climbing or height extension without full structural stabilization and load control. In a tight courtyard, a grinder operates near scattered debris. Then a burst of sparks ignites flammable material and spreads rapidly across the area. Do not operate grinding tools near flammable materials. Clear the area and control spark direction before starting. In a rough construction yard, a telehandler reverses across uneven ground. Then the machine shifts off balance as the terrain drops beneath one side. Do not drive heavy equipment across uneven terrain without stabilizing the machine and maintaining level ground. Heavy equipment stability depends on maintaining its center of gravity within the support base of its wheels. On uneven terrain, one side of the machine can lose support as the ground drops or shifts. This changes the distribution of weight, pushing the center of gravity outside the stability zone. Once this happens, rotational force increases and gravity pulls the machine toward the unsupported side, accelerating the tipping motion. This shift happens rapidly as ground support is lost unevenly, leaving little time to correct the imbalance once tipping motion begins. Assess and stabilize ground conditions before moving heavy equipment. Uneven terrain shifts. Balance quickly and reduces control over the machine. Operate only on surfaces that maintain full support under all wheels. In a calm driveway, a worker leans over a loose tire while inflating it. Then, in a fraction of a second, internal pressure exceeds its limits and the tire fails, releasing energy outward. Never, ever inflate a loose or damaged tire in the open. Always secure it in a restraint device and keep your body out of the blast zone. A tire being inflated acts as a pressurized container, storing energy as compressed air increases inside. As pressure rises, stress builds along the tire's structure, especially at weak points like the sidewall or bead. If the material cannot withstand this stress, it fails suddenly rather than gradually. This sudden rupture releases compressed air at high velocity. The rapid expansion creates a force wave that pushes outward in all directions, displacing nearby objects as pressure drops instantly. Air under pressure stores energy until containment fails. Stay outside the release path, because failure happens without warning. Inside a pipe assembly station, a worker leans over the machine frame, while the automated assembly head suddenly cycles downward. Never, ever work inside an automated machine while the system remains active or capable of cycling. Inside a chemical processing area, a worker mixes chemicals in a drum when a sudden ignition causes a flash of flame at the opening. Do not mix flammable or reactive chemicals without proper grounding, ventilation, and ignition control. Vapor buildup during mixing can ignite instantly. Mixing chemicals increases agitation, which accelerates evaporation and releases a concentrated vapor layer above the liquid surface. If these vapors are flammable, they can quickly mix with air and reach an ignitable concentration, especially around an open drum. At the same time, movement of liquids, tools, and containers can generate static, electricity. Without proper grounding, this charge can discharge as a spark, igniting the vapor cloud and causing a rapid flash from the drum opening. Because the vapor layer concentrates near the drum opening, ignition at that point allows flame to propagate outward rapidly through the surrounding vapor-air mixture. Control vapor buildup and eliminate ignition sources before mixing begins. A single spark can ignite concentrated vapors and trigger a flash in seconds. Inside a demolition room, a narrow wall opening is used as a standing surface, while overhead material is being broken loose from the ceiling above. Do not stand directly under demolition work or on unstable openings. On a busy roadside loading zone, a large stack of glass is being handled on the back of a flatbed truck when it suddenly shifts and drops as its balance is lost. Do not stand in the fall zone of unsecured or vertically positioned loads. Always stabilize and control before handling. On a scrap truck, a worker steps into the middle of loose metal to throw pieces off. Then everything around him suddenly shifts. Never, ever position yourself inside or on top of loose scrap while handling or throwing materials. Loose scrap behaves like an unstable pile with no fixed structure or binding force. When weight is removed or shifted, the load redistributes unevenly toward lower gaps. Standing inside the pile creates pressure points that weaken its internal balance. Once one section collapses, surrounding pieces follow in a cascading movement driven by gravity. If you stand inside the load, you become part of the hazard. Stay outside the material. Never work from within instability. Inside a room, a worker reaches up with a plier near the ceiling. Then a sudden burst of sparks spreads outward from above, turning the overhead space into an ignition hazard. Do not use tools overhead without proper shielding and body positioning. Always control spark direction and maintain safe distance from ignition zones. Inside an auto workshop, a mechanic works beneath a raised vehicle. Then a component under the car suddenly drops without warning. Never, ever place yourself directly beneath a vehicle component that is not independently secured before removal or inspection. Vehicle parts under tension or held by fasteners can store load even when the car itself remains stable. Once a bolt, mount, or support point is loosened, the component's weight can shift instantly. That sudden load transfer turns the part into a falling object with almost no reaction time. If the component is not supported separately, gravity takes over the moment restraint is lost. The hazard is not always the whole vehicle. Sometimes it is the single part being released. Secure the part, not just the car. A stable lift does not make every component safe to remove. At a construction site, a wheel loader moves in close as a truck passes through the work area, turning overlapping vehicle paths into an active collision zone. Do not stand or walk inside an active vehicle travel lane where loaders and trucks are moving. At a residential fire scene, a ladder is set against a heated roof surface. Then, without warning, shifting conditions cause it to lose stability and drop suddenly. Do not rely on an unsecured or unstable ladder in dynamic environments. Always anchor, secure, and verify ladder stability before climbing. A ladder works as a leaning structure where stability depends on friction at the base and support at the top. Heat, water, or debris can reduce friction between the ladder and contact surfaces. Changing conditions and shifting loads can quickly move the center of gravity outside the support line, causing the system to lose equilibrium. Thermal conditions can also weaken contact surfaces, making grip unreliable. Once the ladder's support fails, gravity rapidly accelerates everything downward with no recovery time. If the ladder isn't secured, it's already unstable. Conditions can change faster than you can react. Lock the base, control the angle, and never trust uncertain footing. Beside a raised platform near a garbage truck, one misstep at the edge turns into a sudden drop in seconds. Do not work near soils, an unprotected edge or open pit without proper barriers, awareness, and stable footing. During a heavy lift beside a massive industrial tower, a crane boom suddenly collapses, causing the load in a structure to drop and spread across the ground below. Do not perform heavy lifts without ensuring crane capacity. Boom limits and load stability are fully within safe operating limits. In a courtyard walkway, a man lifts a ground panel, revealing an open access void beneath where the support surface suddenly disappears. Never, ever remove a ground cover or access panel without securing the opening and maintaining stable footing. Ground panels distribute load only when fully seated within their supporting frame. Once lifted or shifted, that structural support is instantly removed, leaving an open void beneath. Any weight applied near the exposed edge is no longer supported, and gravity drives motion downward immediately. Because balance depends on stable footing, even a slight shift toward the opening can result in rapid loss of support before corrective movement is possible. This sudden loss of support occurs instantly, meaning the body cannot adjust quickly enough once weight shifts toward the opening. Secure the opening before removing any ground cover. An exposed void eliminates support instantly and leaves no margin for recovery. Inside a textile machine line, fabric feeds through heated rollers. When accumulated fibers ignite beneath the machine as heat builds in the system. Do not allow flammable textile material to accumulate near heated rollers or mechanical drive component. On a steep dirt hillside, a heavy tractor creeps too close to the edge, and gravity quietly takes control. Never, ever operate heavy equipment across a steep, unstable slope or near a loose embankment edge. Excavated soil loses cohesion once it is cut vertically, reducing its ability to support its own weight. External factors like vibration, moisture, and nearby loads further weaken the soil structure. As stress builds within the soil mass, sections can suddenly shear and slide into the trench. This movement is driven by gravity and occurs rapidly, with large volumes of soil shifting at once, eliminating stability in the surrounding area. Always install proper trench protection before entering or working near excavations. Soil can lose stability without warning and move with overwhelming force. Maintain safe distance from edges and unstable ground at all times. Once balance is lost on a slope, gravity takes control instantly. In an outdoor maintenance yard, a worker strikes at a jammed part with a hammer. When the force suddenly kicks the tool back off the metal, do not hammer against stuck or tensioned metal components without a stable stance, clear strike path, and controlled release plan. Stored force can redirect the tool without warning. At a residential neighborhood, workers stand along the edge of a deep trench. When the soil wall suddenly collapses inward, never, ever work inside or near an unprotected trench without proper shoring, sloping, or trench support systems. Excavated soil loses its natural structural stability once it is cut vertically. Gravity, vibration, and moisture can weaken the soil wall, causing sections of earth to suddenly shear and slide into the trench. When this happens, large volumes of soil can move instantly, filling the excavation space before workers have time to react. Always use trench protection systems before entering or working near excavations. Unstable soil can collapse without warning. Never assume soil stability without proper reinforcement in place. On a roadside, workers prepare equipment for a roofing job when a pressurized gas hose suddenly ruptures and begins to move unpredictably under released pressure. Do not operate pressurized gas equipment without inspecting hoses and connections for damage or wear. During forklift unloading from a truck ramp, the edge suddenly collapses as the truck rolls forward, creating a gap that pulls the machine downward out of support. Never unload forklifts from a truck unless the vehicle is secured and the ramp edge is fully supported. As a forklift transitions from the truck bed to the ramp, its weight shifts toward the edge, concentrating force on a small contact area. If the truck moves even slightly, the support alignment breaks, creating a gap between surfaces. This removes structural support under the wheels, while the forklift's center of gravity continues forward. Once the support is lost, gravity pulls the machine downward, and the imbalance quickly develops into tipping motion. As the front wheels lose support, the rear weight continues forward, increasing tipping force and accelerating the loss of stability. Secure the truck and stabilize the ramp before unloading begins. Even slight movement can remove support and turn transition zones into. An elevated work platform extends from a telescopic boom. Then a sudden movement causes the platform to swing rapidly off its stable path. Do not operate or ride in elevated work platforms without full stabilization and controlled movement. Always secure the base and maintain smooth, predictable motion. A suspended axle hangs from a chain hoist in a workshop. Then a loose linkage turns into a fast-moving swing. Never, ever stand within the swing radius of suspended loads. Always treat hanging components as unpredictable moving hazards. A suspended load naturally behaves like a pendulum, where gravity constantly acts on its mass, while the hoist provides a pivot point. Even when stationary, the system holds potential energy that can convert into motion with the slightest disturbance. When a linkage shifts, slack is taken up, or balance changes. That stored energy redirects into lateral movement. The load can begin to swing, and as it moves, momentum builds, increasing both speed and range with each arc. Because the motion follows a pendulum path, the load can travel farther and faster than expected, especially if triggered suddenly. The hazard lies in how quickly a stable hanging object can transition into a dynamic, moving force. Hanging loads don't stay still, they store motion. One small shift can turn stillness into a powerful swing. Stay clear, control the rigging, and respect the swing zone. A busy kitchen line, a bucket of hot oil sits on the floor. Then a sudden slip turns the entire area into a hazard zone. Do not leave hot oil or heated liquids at ground level in walkways. Store and handle them only in controlled, designated areas. A tractor climbs onto a flatbed trailer, but one shift in balance turns the entire setup into a tipping force. Never, ever load heavy equipment onto trailers without proper alignment, restraint, and weight distribution control. As the tractor moves up the ramp, its center of gravity shifts upward and rearward, reducing stability across the trailer base. This changes how the load is supported, concentrating force on a smaller contact area and increasing the risk of imbalance. If the center of gravity moves beyond the trailer's support zone, gravity creates a rotational moment that begins to lift one end while forcing the other downward. Without restraints or counterbalance, this tipping force can escalate instantly, driven purely by the machine's weight and position. Because this transition happens quickly, even a small misalignment or sudden throttle input can push the system past its balance point, turning controlled loading into uncontrolled motion. Heavy machines don't forgive imbalance. One shift can turn stability into tipping force in seconds. Control the load, secure the ramp, and respect center of gravity at all times. At a construction site beside a running cement mixer, a long stick metal handle suddenly snaps backward with violent force. Do not stand in the rotational path of mixer control handles or loaded levers while equipment is under tension. Inside a truck workshop, a raised cab is held in position for maintenance when hydraulic support fails and the structure drops under its own weight. Never, ever work under a raised truck cab unless a mechanical safety lock or support bar is engaged. Truck cabs tilt forward using hydraulic cylinders to expose the engine compartment for maintenance. These systems rely on hydraulic pressure to hold the cab in position. If pressure leaks, a valve fails, or the cab is not secured with a mechanical lock, gravity immediately pulls the cab downward. Because the cab pivots on front hinges and carries substantial mass, the center of gravity rotates rapidly toward the ground once support is lost, driving the motion downward. Always engage cab safety locks or install support props before entering the engine bay area. Hydraulic pressure alone should never be trusted to hold a raised cab overhead. Verify support systems before placing yourself beneath elevated structures. Inside a warehouse loading bay, a worker rolls a massive paper coil across the floor until it creates a powerful moving pinch zone along its path. Never place your feet in the rolling path of heavy industrial coils. Under a house deck during construction, workers begin removing a support. When the beam shifts and the structure loses support, moving downward under its own weight. Do not remove structural supports without temporary bracing and load control. Structural systems rely on load paths that transfer weight through beams and supports to the ground. When a support element is removed, those forces must redistribute instantly across remaining components. If temporary bracing is not installed, the remaining structure may not handle the sudden load increase. Gravity then drives downward movement as the structure seeks a new equilibrium, resulting in rapid and uncontrolled shifting. This rapid redistribution of forces creates instability that can propagate through the entire structure in seconds. Always support the load before removing any structural element. When one support is removed, the entire system must immediately compensate. At a warehouse loading dock, a forklift lifts a tall pallet through the bay. Then the stacked load suddenly slides off the forks. Never, ever transport unstable or unsecured loads on forklift forks. In a quiet park clearing, someone begins cutting into a tree trunk. Seconds later, the entire tree suddenly pivots and drops along its fall path as gravity takes over. Do not cut a tree without planning the fall direction and escape path. A standing tree holds gravitational potential energy due to its height and mass. As cutting progresses, the structural fibers that maintain balance weaken, shifting the center of mass. Without a proper directional notch, the tree can rotate unpredictably toward the side with least resistance. Once the balance point is crossed, gravity accelerates the fall, and the tree rotates rapidly toward the ground with increasing momentum. Plan the fall direction and clear an escape path before cutting begins. Once the balance shifts, gravity controls the movement instantly. Never remain in the fall path once cutting begins. Inside a machine shop, a large rotating shaft spins on a heavy lathe. Then the cutting tool suddenly catches metal and the workpiece breaks into uncontrolled motion around the spindle. Never, ever approach or adjust a rotating lathe workpiece while the machine is running. Inside a muddy trench, an excavator bucket pushes a worker into saturated soil, sending the loose ground mass surging forward under hydraulic force. Never, ever stand inside an excavation while an excavator is operating above or beside it. Excavator buckets apply strong hydraulic force when pushing or displacing soil. In saturated or loose conditions, soil cohesion is reduced, allowing material to move as a flowing mass rather than a stable structure. When force is applied, the soil can suddenly surge forward due to reduced friction and gravity, pulling it into lower areas. This creates rapid ground movement that expands beyond the immediate contact point of the bucket. Keep clear of active excavation zones during machine operation. Hydraulic force and unstable soil can move ground mass without warning. Stay outside the path of moving soil and active equipment zones. Inside an industrial work area, suspended equipment hangs under tension. Then the support rope suddenly fails and the load drops straight down. Do not stand beneath or beside suspended machinery unless the load is secured with rated support and a clear exclusion zone. In a small motorcycle workshop, a loose tool lies across the floor, right where a worker sits without noticing. Do not allow loose hoses, cables, or tools to remain in active walkways where movement is constant. Pointed tools concentrate force into a very small contact area, increasing pressure instantly upon contact. When force is applied downward, it transfers rapidly with little opportunity to redistribute. Tools belong secured, not scattered. Control your workspace or the hazard will control the moment. On a makeshift scaffold, built from wooden poles and loose planks, workers move along the platform. Then one unstable section suddenly drops away. Never, ever rely on unsecured, flexible supports or improvised platforms when working at height. On a steel fabrication floor, long metal beams stretch across the line, while a cable lies quietly between them. Do not assume a cable, sling, or line is secured. Verify before stepping into its path. Cables, slings, and lines used around heavy materials often carry hidden tension, even when they appear slack. This stored potential energy builds from load weight, positioning, or partial anchoring, and it may not be evenly distributed along the line. When the line is disturbed, shifting nearby material, or slight movement in the load, the tension can suddenly redistribute or release. This rapid energy transfer converts into motion, causing the line to snap, whip, or pull with significant force. Because this release happens in fractions of a second, there is little to no reaction time once triggered. The real hazard lies in the unseen energy within the line, not just its visible position on the floor. What looks still may already be loaded. Check connections, control lines, and never step into uncertain tension zones. At a dockyard, a crane lifts a full-size boat into the air. Then the rigging suddenly goes slack and the entire load drops. Never, ever trust a suspended load without verified tension and secured rigging at all points. On a roadside tanker setup, a hose is adjusted on a pressurized fuel system where even a small release can instantly transform into a vapor ignition hazard. Do not handle or adjust pressurized fuel lines without isolating the system and controlling ignition sources. Inside a pressurized fuel system, liquid fuel is stored under force, meaning any opening can release it at high velocity. As it exits, the fuel doesn't just flow, it breaks into fine droplets and vapor, dramatically increasing its surface area and making it highly flammable. This atomized fuel mixes rapidly with surrounding air, forming a combustible cloud that can spread beyond the immediate work zone. Because the mixture is already within an ignitable range, it only takes a minimal energy source, like static buildup, metal contact, or a nearby hot surface, to trigger rapid flash ignition. The danger is not just the fuel itself, but how quickly it transitions into a dispersed vapor cloud that can ignite almost instantly once released. Fuel doesn't just leak, it atomizes and turns the air into an instant ignition zone. Even a small release can spread risk faster than you can react. Shut it down, release the pressure, and eliminate every spark before you move in. On a roadside, a large metal dumpster is opened and someone leans inside. Then the entire container suddenly tips forward. Never, ever climb into or lean inside a container that is not secured against movement or tipping. Dumpsters on wheels have a narrow base and can pivot easily when weight shifts. When a person climbs or leans inside, the center of gravity moves forward beyond the wheel axis. This creates a tipping moment that overcomes the container's stability. Once that balance point is crossed, gravity causes a rapid forward rotation with no stopping force. Heavier the load shift, the faster the tipping motion accelerates. If it can roll, it can tip. Never trust its balance. Your position can shift the load. Stay outside unstable containers. Inside a fabrication shop, a worker steps onto the metal workspace to climb up. Then his footing suddenly slips. Never, ever climb onto elevated work surfaces without proper access and stable footing. Smooth metal surfaces offer low friction, especially when contaminated with dust or debris. As body weight shifts upward during climbing, balance depends on stable contact points. A small loss of friction at the foot creates immediate instability. With no secure handhold or platform, the body drops as gravity overcomes the reduced grip. If it's not meant for climbing, don't step on it. One slip is all it takes to lose control. At a residential excavation site, a compact excavator works right at the edge. Then the ground beneath it suddenly gives way. Do not operate heavy equipment on unsupported or unstable ground. Always assess edge stability and maintain a safe setback distance. In a warehouse lane, a pickup truck tows a forklift forward. Then the truck suddenly stops and starts rolling backward. Never, ever stand between or near connected vehicles during towing unless both units are fully controlled, aligned, and protected against rollback. During towing, both the pickup truck and the forklift become a connected moving system, with force transferring through the tow connection. If the lead vehicle suddenly stops without secure braking control, gravity, slope, drivetrain release, or loss of hold, can allow it to roll backward, reversing the force direction through the tow line or hitch. That sudden change creates a dangerous compression and movement zone between the two machines. Because both vehicles carry mass and momentum, even a short backward roll can close distance instantly and turn the tow path into a high-force hazard area. Control both machines before the tow begins and maintain full braking stability. Rollback can reverse force instantly and turn controlled motion into a dangerous compression zone. Always confirm both vehicles are secured before initiating or stopping movement. On a street utility pole, a metal structure is cut into, triggering a sudden release of electrical sparks from the system. Do not cut or tamper with utility poles or electrical hardware without proper isolation and protection. In a busy demolition yard, stacked materials sit beneath an elevated load when the large, box-shaped object suddenly drops as support is lost. Never, ever stand beneath or beside suspended or stacked loads during lifting or demolition operations. Heavy loads stored or lifted above ground contain gravitational potential energy. If the support, balance, or restraint fails, gravity accelerates the mass downward instantly with little warning. Always stay outside the drop zone of elevated loads. Gravity turns unstable loads into instant hazards. Keep clear of suspended loads and unstable stacking areas at all times. Inside a factory floor, a forklift carries a massive coil until an unstable shift sends the load rolling and the system destabilizes at once. Keep clear of suspended or unstable loads. Stay completely outside the swing, roll, and drop zone at all times. On a busy roadside, a large glass panel moves into an active traffic lane, while a fast-moving vehicle approaches through a blind line of sight. Control the work zone before entering traffic. Use spotters, barriers, or visibility checks to prevent unexpected contact. On an open roadway near a university, active traffic, lanes remain unprotected, while a fast-moving vehicle continues through the path without slowing. Always establish a controlled traffic zone. Use cones, barriers, and advance warning to separate moving vehicles from active work areas. Inside a dim loading area, unsecured equipment and loads shift within a confined space, where limited visibility hides sudden movement. Do not position yourself within the direct path of unsecured loads or vehicles. Always maintain a clear exclusion zone during loading operations. Inside a small restaurant kitchen at dawn, gas begins to accumulate in an enclosed space, turning the area into a rising pressure hazard. Always verify gas lines and connections before operation and immediately isolate the supply if a leak is suspected. Do not allow enclosed spaces to accumulate fuel gas. On a narrow offshore platform surrounded by water, a worker leans to dismantle a tension chain fitting right inside its line of force. Do not strike or tamper with tension chains or rigging components. Release or isolate the load before attempting any adjustment. At the loading bay, everything looks routine until a forklift carrying a pallet moves past, and the gap disappears in a split second. Maintain a hard exclusion zone around any moving forklift, especially when it is carrying a pallet or raised load. Pedestrians must stay completely outside the travel path, and operators must not move until the lane is visibly clear on both sides of the machine. In a busy workshop, a machine continues operating during servicing, its moving components cycling continuously without isolation. Don't ever work on or near moving machinery without full lockout, isolation, and zero energy verification. In an outdoor workshop, a heavy rim is forced into a truck tire, unsecured, unstable, and holding stored tension. Never, ever attempt to seat or force a tire rim without proper restraints, inflation control, and safe positioning. Do not attempt to force or seat components while stored energy remains uncontrolled. On a narrow sand slope, a mini excavator operates at an unsupported angle until shifting ground gives way and the machine destabilizes instantly. Do maintain proper positioning and load balance when operating on slopes. Do not operate tracked equipment on unstable or unsupported ground where gravity can override control. On a narrow roadside, a worker climbs a lightweight scaffold pressed against a tree, cutting into a thick trunk that's already leaning the wrong way. Do not cut a load-bearing section of a tree from an unsecured scaffold. Always establish controlled fall direction, secure footing, and proper positioning before making any cut. On a construction site, a long beam is positioned between columns, hanging unsupported until it shifts, loses alignment, and drops through the structure under gravity. Do secure structural members with controlled rigging and confirmed connections before release. Do not position or release loads without a defined and fully cleared drop zone beneath. Inside a tire workshop, a mounted rim holds pressurized energy until a sudden release drives the entire assembly upward in an instant. Never, ever strike a mounted tire or rim without proper restraints. Stored pressure can release violently and without warning. Inside a small shop workspace, an e-bike battery charges in a confined, cluttered area until internal heat builds and triggers a rapid thermal runaway. Do not charge lithium-ion batteries in confined, cluttered, or unattended spaces. Keep them on stable, non-flammable surfaces with constant supervision and proper ventilation. Lithium-ion cells can enter thermal runaway when internal heat exceeds safe limits, triggering a chain reaction of rising temperature and pressure. This releases stored energy rapidly and can drive heat and expanding gases into surrounding materials. Control heat, space, and surroundings. Unchecked. Energy escalates fast. On a roadside construction site, a dump truck bed remains raised during loading, while the suspended tailgate and bed components suddenly release and drop under their own weight. Do not stand or work beneath a raised truck bed or tailgate. Always secure elevated components with proper supports and keep clear of pinch zones during manual adjustment. At a deep excavation site, a crane lifts an excavator across a narrow trench until a shift in load balance moves the center of gravity beyond support and the system begins to tip. Do not perform lifting operations without proper load calculations, rigging plans, and exclusion zones. Always ensure lifting equipment is rated and positioned to handle the load safely. When a suspended load shifts beyond the crane's center of gravity or support limits, instability increases rapidly. This creates torque that reduces stability and can lead to loss of balance or uncontrolled load movement. Control balance and load. Position. Gravity follows the center of mass. Inside a fabrication workshop, a heavy metal component moves across the floor until a sudden shift in balance causes the load to accelerate under gravity. Do control heavy components with proper handling tools and stable positioning. Do not allow loads to move or shift without controlled guidance and defined movement paths. Heavy objects carry momentum once in motion, and friction alone cannot stop them quickly. When balance is lost, gravity accelerates the load, increasing force and reducing control. Motion increases force. Uncontrolled loads escalate fast. At a tire workshop, a large truck tire is being inflated as internal pressure builds until a sudden release drives the assembly outward with force. Never, ever stand over or directly beside a tire during inflation. Always use a safety cage and maintain a safe distance from the pressure zone. Inside a factory floor, a calendar machine runs continuously. It's rotating. Rollers drawing material toward a narrowing nip point under constant force. Do isolate, guard, and lock out all rotating equipment before access. Do not allow exposure to active nip points while rollers are in motion. Rotating rollers create nip points where opposing surfaces generate continuous pulling force. When material enters this zone, friction and rotation draw it inward with increasing force. Rotation creates continuous pull. Unprotected nip points escalate instantly. On a wet yard, an overloaded truck rolls onto a narrow weighbridge while stacked logs shift and the center of gravity moves beyond stable support. Avoid overloading a vehicle or ignore load distribution. Always secure and balance the load before moving on to elevated or narrow platforms. In a small electrical room, a live panel carries high voltage until a fault triggers a rapid arc discharge that releases energy in an instant. Do isolate, de-energize, and verify all electrical systems before access. Do not operate or interact with energized panels without proper grounding and controlled conditions. Electrical systems store and transmit high voltage and current that can release instantly when a fault occurs. Arc faults create ionized pathways that generate extreme heat, pressure, and expanding gases, rapidly releasing stored energy into the surrounding space. energy follows the path of least resistance. Uncontrolled faults release it instantly. Inside a narrow construction pit, a suspended bundle of steel shifts, turning a controlled lift into a rapid swinging load under tension. Do establish and maintain clear exclusion zones around suspended loads. Do not allow any overlap between load movement paths and surrounding zones during lifting operations. At a roadside fuel stop, a tanker begins moving while still connected, placing the hose under tension as force rapidly builds along its length. Never, ever move a vehicle while it is still connected to a fueling hose. Always verify full disconnection before motion. When a vehicle moves while still connected, the hose becomes a tensioned link between a fixed point and a moving mass. As the truck accelerates, tensile force rapidly builds along the hose length, transferring mechanical energy from the vehicle into the line. Once this force exceeds the hose or coupling's tolerance, the connection fails abruptly, releasing stored tension. This sudden release converts the stretched energy into kinetic motion, causing a rapid recoil motion along the hose. Movement turns a connected hose into a loaded hazard. Stop, disconnect, and confirm before any vehicle moves. On a lonely construction area, a skid steer rolls forward with its bucket raised, then suddenly tips backward as stability is lost. Never operate a skid steer with a raised load. Keep attachments low to maintain stability and control. Inside a workshop, a long metal rod lies near a parked car. Then, in a split-second, vehicle movement turns it into a fast-moving lever. Never allow unsecured tools or objects to remain in potential force paths created by moving vehicles. A long, rigid object like a metal rod acts as a lever when one end is suddenly forced or pinned by an external force. In this case, the moving car. When the vehicle contacts or traps part of the rod, it transfers kinetic energy into the object, causing rapid rotational motion around a pivot point. Because of the rod's length, even a small displacement at one end translates into high-speed motion at the other end. Long tools can become high-speed hazards when combined with moving vehicles. Keep clear of force paths and never assume an object will stay still. Inside a metal workshop, a rotating shaft spins at speed. Then, in an instant, the machine takes over any nearby movement. Never allow contact with a rotating shaft, spindle, or roller while in motion. Maintain full stop and isolation before access. At a facility entrance, truck begins to move while a large metal gate sits unsecured, and in seconds the entire structure is pulled into motion. Never connect or leave any movable structure unsecured near a vehicle in motion. Always isolate, secure, and confirm full clearance before driving or releasing equipment. The gate here acts like a large hinged structure with mass and stored positional energy. When the truck moves while still connected or in contact with the gate, it transfers force directly into the structure. Because the gate is mounted on a pivot, that force converts into rotational motion, causing the entire frame to swing or collapse rapidly along its arc. As the truck continues moving, it effectively becomes the driving force of the gate's motion, pulling it beyond its normal range. The combination of vehicle torque and the gate's weight creates a sudden uncontrolled sweep across a wide area. Anyone within that swing radius is exposed instantly, with no time to react once motion begins. If it's attached, it moves. If it swings, it sweeps the entire space. Secure every structure, verify disconnection, and never move a vehicle until the path is completely free of anything it can pull or carry with it. Inside a polished indoor hallway, a ladder under load becomes unstable when a slight shift in balance causes the setup to lose stability instantly. Always ensure ladders are fully secured, properly positioned, and supported before working at height. Slight shifts in balance or footing can quickly turn a stable setup into an uncontrolled fall. At a stone yard, a crane lowers a massive suspended block beside a truck. Then, in a sudden shift, the load swings and the entire vehicle reacts unexpectedly. Maintain a clear exclusion zone around suspended loads and heavy lifting operations. Avoid positioning within zones between fixed objects and moving equipment where shifting forces can create crushing or tipping hazards. Suspended loads act as dynamic masses, meaning their center of gravity can shift as they are lowered or repositioned. If the load contacts another surface, like the truck bed or nearby stone blocks, It can transfer force unevenly, creating lateral pressure. This force can destabilize the truck, especially if the ground is uneven or the load is not centered. Heavy loads don't just move, they transfer force. Distance is the only safe buffer. At a roadside workshop, a dump truck bed is raised. Then, without warning, the support system gives way. Never rely on hydraulic systems alone to support a raised dump bed. Use solid mechanical supports to secure the load. Inside a dimly lit loading bay, a forklift approaches a trailer with a raised pallet. Then the gap between machine and truck begins to close. Maintain strict separation between moving equipment and pedestrian zones by establishing and enforcing exclusion areas. Positioning within gaps between powered vehicles and fixed structures creates high-risk, pinch zones where small movements generate large compressive forces. A forklift carrying a load shifts its center of gravity forward, increasing momentum and reducing stopping responsiveness. When the machine advances toward a fixed object like a trailer, the narrowing gap creates a pinch zone where force multiplies rapidly due to the rigid surfaces on both sides. Even low-speed movement generates significant compressive force, and once contact begins, the operator has limited ability to reverse instantly due to inertia and load weight. Machines don't need speed to generate force. Space is your only protection. On a busy construction site, a surface appears stable until underlying support fails, exposing a concealed void beneath. Always verify ground integrity and clearly mark or secure openings, trenches, or weak surfaces. Assumed stability without confirmation creates sudden collapse hazards under load. In a tight construction trench, a mini excavator inches forward when a small control input suddenly sends the machine's arm swinging into the surrounding space without warning. Maintain clear separation between operators and ground zones by enforcing defined work areas and communication protocols. Standing within the swing radius of an excavator exposes the zone to sudden unintended movements, where small inputs create immediate contact hazards. Excavator controls translate small lever inputs into hydraulic force, causing rapid and powerful movement of the boom and bucket. Because hydraulic systems respond instantly, even slight unintended input results in immediate motion, and the mass of the arm amplifies force with little time for correction. Hydraulics don't hesitate, they respond instantly. Distance is the only real safeguard. In a quiet woodland clearing, a chainsaw cuts into a heavy branch under load, then gravity builds force through the cut, releasing more energy than expected. Plan and complete cuts with full awareness of load, direction, stability, and escape path. Cutting a loaded branch while elevated introduces shifting forces that can transfer weight suddenly and destabilize the setup as the cut finishes. Beneath a raised vehicle, a transmission housing holds stored mechanical energy. Then, in an instant, that force releases all at once. Ensure all components under tension load or mechanical engagement are fully secured, isolated, and stabilized before access. Systems like transmissions, springs, or rotating assemblies can release stored energy suddenly, turning confined spaces into immediate hazard zones. Mechanical systems store energy through tension, compression, and rotational inertia within tightly packed and constrained components. When fasteners are removed or internal parts shift unexpectedly, this stored energy can release instantly, causing sudden movement, rotation, or separation of parts, especially in confined spaces where there is minimal clearance and no time to react or withdraw safely. Stored energy doesn't announce itself. Control the system before entering the hazard zone. Inside a busy container yard, a forklift maneuvers with a raised load, while its blind zone completely hides the space directly in front of it. Maintain strict exclusion zones around moving equipment and actively enforce them with clear communication, designated spotters, and visual controls. When visibility is limited and no guidance is present, any position within the operating radius becomes an immediate struck by or crush hazard. Inside a bagging facility, a moving conveyor keeps running while a worker steps too close to its exposed rotating section. Never approach or interact with a moving conveyor unless it is fully isolated, locked out, and guarded. Exposed rotating components create continuous entanglement hazards that can draw in materials instantly. Conveyor systems operate using continuous rotational motion driven by motors, rollers, and belts that maintain constant speed and torque. When contact occurs at the nip point or rotating interface, friction between moving surfaces generates a pulling force that rapidly overcomes resistance. The system does not stop instantly, and momentum within rotating components sustains motion once engagement begins. Moving machinery doesn't pause for mistakes, lock it out, or stay completely clear. Inside a residential building, an elevator shaft stands open while repair work is underway from the lift platform. Then something goes wrong in seconds. Never, ever perform repair work inside or on an elevator without securing the platform, isolating movement, and using fall protection. Open shafts create direct vertical drop hazards with no margin for error. A dump truck raises its trailer in a yard. Then, without warning, the entire structure suddenly collapses downward in a split second. Do not stand near or operate beneath a raised dump body without verifying mechanical integrity, hydraulic stability, and load condition. When a dump trailer is elevated, gravitational potential energy is stored in both the raised structure and the load. The hydraulic system maintains this position under pressure, but any failure, such as hose rupture, cylinder instability, structural hinge stress, or sudden load shift, can instantly remove support. This causes rapid conversion of stored potential energy into kinetic motion, accelerating the trailer downward. Raised equipment is stored energy waiting for release. If it's elevated, treat it like it can drop, because it can, instantly. In a cluttered workshop, a spinning machine suddenly ejects the workpiece, releasing stored energy into the surrounding space in a split second. Never, ever work directly in line with a rotating workpiece unless it is fully secured, properly mounted, and shielded. Any failure in grip can instantly convert stored rotational energy into a high-speed projectile. Inside a truck loading yard, one loose helmet on the ground turns dangerous the second a smaller vehicle passes through the work area. Do not leave loose items inside active vehicle routes or loading zones because passing traffic, tire movement, and sudden airflow can turn unsecured objects into fast-moving hazards without warning. As a vehicle moves through the yard, it disturbs the air and ground around it. That motion can shift a loose object on the floor, especially something light enough to roll, lift, or skip across the surface. Once displaced, the object picks up speed from the moving air, nearby tire turbulence, and surface rebound. The danger is not only the vehicle itself, but the secondary projectile created when unsecured items are left inside an active transport zone. Movement spreads. Anything unsecured becomes part of it. In a crowded palletizing area, a forklift moves into a tight space where the machine's path narrows into a confined hazard zone. Never ever allow positioning within a forklift's operating zone without clear separation because even slow-moving equipment generates enough force to create immediate hazards in confined spaces. Inside a repair workshop, a car sits elevated on a lift until the support suddenly gives way and the entire vehicle drops forward. Do not position or operate a vehicle on a lift unless all support arms are correctly placed at designated lift points and fully secured before any work begins. A vehicle lift depends on correct contact points to evenly distribute weight. If the arms are misaligned or not firmly seated, the load becomes unstable. Once the center of gravity moves outside those support points, gravity creates a forward rotational force, causing the vehicle to tip off the lift. As work begins, even small external forces or slight movement can introduce additional torque. Stability is set at the start. One bad position changes everything. In an open industrial yard, a loaded truck sits dangerously close to overhead power lines. Then the clearance zone disappears in an instant. Maintain safe clearance between vehicles' loads and overhead power lines. Verify spacing and control height before any elevated positioning. Inside a tire workshop, internal pressure builds inside a large tire, seconds before the system releases its stored energy in a rapid discharge. Control stored pressure energy during tire inflation, use restraint devices, maintain distance, and never position your body in the trajectory zone. When failure occurs, the compressed air expands rapidly, converting stored energy into a strong pressure wave. This release can drive the tire, rim components, or nearby objects outward as the force disperses through the system. Stored pressure isn't visible, but it can release instantly. Distance and proper restraints are the only reliable control against that energy. Inside a bakery prep area, a running dough mixer rotates steadily. Seconds before, the slow motion builds into a powerful pulling force. Stop and isolate all mixer motion before any access. Maintain separation from rotating components and use tools designed for safe interaction with the system. High above a construction floor, a suspended concrete beam shifts mid-placement. Then gravity takes control in an instant. Maintain clearance from all suspended loads, keep the drop zone unobstructed, and ensure loads are fully secured and stabilized before any guided movement. A suspended beam carries significant gravitational potential energy, especially at elevation. Its stability depends entirely on external control systems, cranes, rigging, slings, and connection points. If any part of this system becomes unbalanced, uneven tension, improper rigging angle, or sudden movement, the beam can rotate or slip out of alignment. As the center of mass shifts beyond the support line, gravity creates a rotational moment that accelerates the beam downward. If it's hanging, it can fall. Instability develops without visible warning. Distance from suspended loads is the only reliable control against gravity-driven motion. On a residential driveway, a ladder shifts during handling. Then unsecured material above loses stability and drops directly along a vertical path. Secure all materials positioned above elevation, maintain a clear fall path, and stabilize ladders and overhead items before any handling or movement. On an elevated factory walkway beside a large rotating drum, surface motion builds, then the system's pull force takes over instantly. Maintain safe clearance from rotating equipment and isolate all motion before access. Keep all zones outside the machine's pull range clear at all times. Rotating drums and rollers generate continuous motion with strong surface friction. When material contacts the surface, friction transfers momentum instantly, drawing anything along the direction of rotation. This creates an in-running nip point where surfaces pull material inward. The circular motion also produces high tangential velocity at the drum surface. If it rotates, it pulls. Motion transfers force instantly. Distance and full energy isolation are the only reliable controls against that mechanical pull. On a residential street, a suspended glass panel shifts mid-placement. Then the load loses stability and drops instantly under gravity. Stabilize all suspended loads and maintain a fully clear drop zone. Any unsecured load can shift and release directly under gravitational force. Inside a vehicle workshop, a car is suspended overhead, then a connected component shifts and stored load force redirects instantly through the system. Never interact with any components still connected to a loaded system. Fully isolate support and release all stored force before any access. When a connected component shifts, it can become part of the active load path. Instead of force dissipating safely, it transfers through the structure, redirecting stored energy into motion. This is a classic tension release hazard. Stored force in a mounted or bound system can release instantly when alignment changes. Without proper isolation or secondary support, the system remains dynamically connected and capable of sudden force transfer. If it's still connected, it still carries load. Break the load path before any interaction with the system. On a farm worksite, a blocked machine appears stable until stored resistance releases and the system's motion turns into a force that pulls everything inward. Never interact with material in an active or loaded machine. Shut it down, isolate all energy, and clear obstructions only when the system is fully at rest. At a yard entrance, a large metal gate stands in place until its top support suddenly fails and the entire structure. On a quiet street, energized equipment inside a service enclosure suddenly releases a burst of light and energy across the surrounding space. Don't approach energized electrical equipment without proper arc-rated protection and controlled distance. Electrical energy can release violently in an instant. On a dirt construction road, a truck rolls forward, then sparks suddenly begin trailing from beneath the chassis. Do not operate a vehicle with dragging components or unsecured parts. friction and impact can escalate instantly. Around a compact industrial machine, components are positioned close to moving parts. Then the mechanism suddenly cycles while material remains inside the operating zone. Never place hands inside an active machine without full lockout and control. Unexpected motion is always a risk. Inside a garage, a ladder is positioned for access. When the base suddenly slips sideways without warning, ladders can lose grip instantly. If not secured, always stabilize the base and ensure proper footing before use. On a backyard ladder, a thick tree branch is cut while positioned above a ladder. When the branch begins to fall directly into the drop zone below, never cut a load-bearing branch while positioned on a ladder beneath it. Always control your position and the fall zone before the cut. On a roadside curb, a heavy metal unit is moved onto a small truck. When its center of gravity shifts past the stability limit and it begins to tip, do not manually control a heavy load once it passes its balance point. Always use proper equipment and controlled unloading method. Inside a lab test area, a battery cell enters thermal runaway, releasing heat, gas, and sparks as the reaction escalates in seconds. Do not approach or handle a battery undergoing thermal runaway. Maintain distance and use controlled containment systems. Inside a construction space, a long metal prop is pushed upward into position from a ladder when the overhead setup becomes unstable. Do not install or adjust vertical supports without securing load paths and communication. Always stabilize, align, and control from the base up. On a factory floor, a rotating roller machine runs at speed, its pinch point forming a powerful draw-in zone near the surface. Do not reach into or lean over active rotating rollers. Always isolate, guard, and stop motion before interaction. On a construction site, a 50-kilogram cement bag is released from height, accelerating downward into the drop zone below. Never attempt to catch a falling heavy load. Always control descent using proper handling methods and clear drop zones. On a cluttered construction floor, steel rods advance into a bending machine, where the feeding mechanism pulls material forward through a high-force pinch zone. Always make sure you do not place your hands near feeding or rotating material. Always maintain a safe distance and use tools or guards. On a flatbed truck, a forklift starts driving off without proper support, right as its center of gravity shifts past the edge. Do not unload a forklift without a stable ramp or dock. Always ensure continuous ground support before moving. In a front yard, a partially cut tree is pulled with a rope. When stored, tension sends it falling unpredictably across the drop zone. Never stand near or within the fall radius of a tree under tension. Always clear the area and control the direction before cutting. On a rooftop edge, a ladder is being repositioned sideways when one base point loses grip and the entire setup shifts without warning. Do not reposition or walk a ladder sideways at height. Always secure it and maintain 3-point stability before moving. Inside a workshop, material feeds into a rotating machine where loose items can catch and be pulled inward into the mechanism. Never wear loose gloves near rotating machinery. Always keep hands clear or use proper tools designed for feeding. Rotating machines create in-running nip points where surfaces pull material inward. Gloves increase surface friction, making them easier to catch on moving parts. Once the glove contacts the rotating component, it acts like a hook, instantly grabbing onto motion. The machine's continuous rotation generates pulling force stronger than human resistance. This creates a rapid draw-in effect, pulling material toward the pinch zone. Unlike rigid objects, gloves deform and wrap, increasing the chance of entanglement. The motion does not pause, so the pulling force continues once contact begins. Loose gear gets pulled the moment it contacts moving parts. Rotation doesn't release once it grabs. Keep all loose items clear, use proper tools, and never enter a rotating hazard zone unprotected. On a roadside beside a flatbed truck loaded with massive concrete slabs, one piece suddenly shifts toward the edge without warning. Do not walk or stand beside unsecured heavy loads. Always maintain a safe distance from suspended or stacked materials. Inside a busy car wash bay, a moving conveyor track guides vehicles forward across wet concrete, creating a continuous pull zone along its path. Do not place your feet near moving conveyor tracks. Always stay clear of pinch points and guided wheel paths. Conveyor tracks operate by applying a constant mechanical pulling force that moves objects along a fixed path without interruption. Any object or surface that comes into contact with the moving track is subjected to this continuous force, which does not pause or adjust for unexpected interference. In a wet environment, water significantly reduces the coefficient of friction between footwear and the ground, making it easier to lose stable footing. This combination of reduced traction and continuous motion means that even a small slip can bring a foot into the moving path. Once contact occurs, the conveyor's steady force can quickly draw objects into pinch points where moving and fixed surfaces meet, creating a rapid and difficult-to-escape hazard zone. Moving tracks don't stop for mistakes. Motion continues without hesitation. Stay clear of the path, control footing, and never combine movement with low traction zones. On a backyard deck edge, a ladder is positioned for access. When the base suddenly shifts without warning, do not stand on unstable ladders or overreach while elevated. Always secure the base and maintain 3 points of contact. Inside a workshop, large boards are stacked upright against a wall. Then the entire stack suddenly tips forward. Never stand in front of unsecured vertical materials. Always brace, secure, or store loads to prevent tipping. When panels are stored vertically, their stability depends entirely on the position of their center of gravity relative to the base. A slight forward shift, caused by uneven contact, vibration, or handling, moves that center of mass past the support line, instantly turning the stack into a rotating system. As the first board begins to fall, gravitational torque increases rapidly, pulling the rest of the stack with it. Each additional panel adds mass and momentum, creating a cascading domino effect where force multiplies with every impact. The falling stack accelerates under gravity, leaving almost no reaction time and producing a wide, fast-moving impact zone. Stacked materials fall like dominoes once balance is lost. Motion multiplies instantly. Secure every layer, control the stack, and never stand in a potential fall path. In a cramped service room packed with extinguishers and gas cylinders, internal pressure rises beyond the rated limit without warning. Do not tamper with or overpressurize a fire extinguisher beyond its rated limits. Always use calibrated equipment and controlled procedures. Inside a robotics lab, a suspended robotic arm suddenly powers on, and its first movement doesn't stay within its safe zone. Do not energize or activate robotic systems without securing the work envelope and ensuring all personnel are outside the hazard zone. Industrial robotic arms operate using high-torque electric or hydraulic actuators designed to move payloads with precision and speed. When suspended, the system's center of mass is no longer fixed to a rigid base. Instead, it behaves like a pendulum. This introduces an additional degree of freedom, allowing gravity and inertia to amplify any motion initiated by the motors. At the moment of activation, even a small commanded movement or calibration pulse can generate rotational torque at the joints. Because the arm is hanging, that torque transfers into angular momentum around the suspension point. The longer the arm and the heavier the payload, the greater the moment of inertia, meaning once motion begins, it resists stopping and continues to swing. Robots don't recognize proximity, only program paths and applied force. Define and secure the work zone before activation, or the machine will move without regard for space. Between two trees in a tight backyard, a compact loader places a trunk under tension. When a slight shift redirects the stored force without warning, do not stand within the fall path or tension zone of a tree under load. Always assume stored force can release unpredictably. Suspended above a truck bed, a heavy steel structure begins to tilt. And once gravity takes over, there's no stopping the direction it chooses. Stay clear of suspended loads. Assume balance can shift at any moment, and gravity will act instantly. A suspended load is stable only when its center of gravity remains directly below the lifting point. Even a small shift can create rotational torque that causes tipping. Once the load passes its balance point, gravity accelerates the rotation, converting potential energy into kinetic energy with rapidly increasing force. Suspended loads don't fail slowly. They pass a balance point, then move with a force. If a load can swing or fall into a zone, that zone is already hazardous. A forklift decelerates sharply with a raised load, and in that instant, the weight shifts forward past the point of recovery. Do not brake sharply or travel with an elevated load. Keep loads low and stable to maintain control of the center of gravity. On a steep metal rooftop covered in snow, one step loses friction and gravity takes control instantly. Use fall protection on sloped or icy roofs. Secure yourself before stepping onto low-friction surfaces. Snow and ice drastically reduce the coefficient of friction between footwear and the surface, especially on smooth materials like metal roofing. On an inclined plane, gravity creates a constant downslope force. Once friction is overcome, acceleration increases rapidly, making recovery nearly impossible. On a slope, gravity is constant. Friction is the only thing holding you in place. Secure yourself before stepping, or the surface will decide your movement without warning. A heavy pallet rolls down a slight slope, and the moment control is lost, its momentum turns it into a high-mass moving load. Do not position yourself in front of or beside a moving load on a slope. Always stay clear of its travel path and control zone. A flooded washroom floor electrical equipment runs across a wet floor, where water spreads current and expands the hazard zone instantly. Do not touch or operate electrical equipment when standing on a wet surface or in pooled water. Water reduces surface resistance and spreads electrical potential across the floor, effectively enlarging the conductive zone. When contact is made with a live or faulted machine, current flows through the lowest resistance path to ground, often through the body. Wet floors turn small faults into widespread electrical hazards instantly. Eliminate moisture, isolate power, and never assume a surface is safe around energized equipment. A quiet roadside with a stationary vehicle. Then, in a split second, a fast-moving car turns the area into an active traffic hazard zone. Do not leave a vehicle exposed on an active roadway without clear warning signals, visibility measures, and safe positioning. A workshop filled with machines and stacked units. Then a sudden electrical arc ignites a fast-spreading fire in an instant. Operate electrical systems only with proper isolation, ventilation, and protection. Keep ignition sources separated from flammable materials at all times. Electrical faults can create arcs when current jumps across a gap between conductors, producing extremely high temperatures that can exceed several thousand degrees in a fraction of a second. This rapid energy release generates intense heat, bright plasma, and molten particles that can easily ignite nearby flammable materials. In enclosed or poorly ventilated spaces, heat and combustible gases accumulate quickly, increasing pressure and accelerating flame spread. Across available fuel surfaces, the arc also sustains itself as long as energy is present, continuously feeding the fire and expanding the hazard zone beyond the original ignition point. One spark is enough when the environment is unprepared. Ignition spreads faster than reaction. Control every source, isolate combustibles, and never allow energy and fuel to meet uncontrolled. A tire shop, a mounted wheel under pressure, then in a split second, the stored force releases instantly. Handle pressurized tires only with proper restraint, inflation control, and safe positioning. Maintain distance from any potential release path. A bulldozer easing down a trailer ramp. Then the balance shifts and gravity takes over instantly. Do not operate heavy equipment on an unstable trailer or uneven ground without proper support, alignment, and load control. Heavy equipment like bulldozers has a high center of mass, especially when positioned on an inclined surface such as a trailer ramp. As the machine moves forward, its weight shifts dynamically, and even a small misalignment or uneven surface can push the center of gravity outside the machine's support base. When this happens, stability is lost instantly, and gravity begins to create a tipping moment that increases rapidly. The slope of the ramp adds a forward and downward force component, accelerating the shift and reducing traction between the tracks and the surface. Stability is everything when mass and weight amplify every small imbalance. Level the ground, secure the setup, and control every movement before gravity takes over. A busy production floor with conveyors in motion, then a sudden shift at the edge sends material dropping into an unprotected zone. Keep clear of open pits, hoppers, and unguarded drop zones. Use barriers, fall protection, and controlled access to isolate the hazard. On a roadside loading area, a pickup stacked high with mattresses starts to lean, and the entire load shifts in. Seconds. Do not climb or work on top of unsecured or overstacked loads. Stabilize and secure materials before any access or handling. Stacking lightweight but bulky materials like mattresses increases height without adding a stable base, which raises the overall center of gravity of the load. As the stack gets taller, even minor external forces, such as wind, movement of the vehicle, or shifting weight, can create a tipping moment. Because the load is loosely secured, there is little resistance to lateral movement, allowing the upper layers to shift independently from the base. Once the center of gravity moves beyond the edge of the support area, gravity rapidly accelerates the entire stack outward. This creates a cascading effect, where each shifting layer adds momentum, causing the entire load to collapse or fall in a chain reaction. Height and poor securing create hidden instability that builds without warning. Stabilize every layer, secure the load fully, or the entire stack will shift beyond control. On a snowy construction site, an excavator bucket swings across its working radius, and the safe clearance disappears in an instant. Do not stand or work beneath a suspended or moving machine attachment. Always maintain a clear exclusion zone. On a quiet roadside, a flatbed truck drifts off its path, then collides with the bridge edge. Do not assume control is guaranteed. Maintain speed discipline and full attention, especially near unprotected edges. When a vehicle drifts off its path, inertia keeps it moving in the same direction, creating lateral momentum that pushes it outward. At speed, this force increases quickly, reducing the chance of recovery. If the vehicle strikes a weak or unprotected edge, the impact force can exceed the structure's capacity, causing immediate failure. Without a barrier to absorb or redirect the energy, the vehicle continues moving beyond the roadway, turning a minor drift into a major loss of control. Control loss turns roads into hazards in an instant. Manage speed, maintain direction, and never rely on weak edges to stop momentum. Inside a workshop, stacked metal sheets shift near a running machine, and gravity takes over in a split second. Do not handle or stand beside unsecured heavy materials near operating machinery. Stabilize loads before any interaction. In a narrow alley beside shuttered shops, a vehicle moves through a tight clearance, and the space disappears in an instant. Keep clear of the space between moving vehicles and fixed structures. Maintain safe distance and preserve an open escape path. When a vehicle moves through a confined space, the gap between it and nearby structures becomes a dynamic pinch zone. Even small steering changes or shifts in position can instantly reduce that clearance to zero. As the vehicle continues moving, its mass and momentum create a strong compression force within that narrowing space. Because the motion is continuous and the clearance is minimal, there is almost no time to react once the gap begins to close, turning tight spaces into high-risk zones. Tight spaces turn motion into instant compression zones. Keep your distance, protect your escape path, and never step into a closing gap. At a construction site beneath an elevated structure, a crane lifts a large concrete panel and the load suddenly swings off control. Suspended loads create dynamic swing zones, maintain distance, and enforce exclusion zones around all lifting operations. Inside a hotel lobby, a decorative structure suddenly breaks, sending debris outward and leaving the area unstable in seconds. Do not hesitate after a structural failure. Immediately move away from the hazard zone and assess for secondary risks. When a structure breaks, stored energy releases unpredictably, and debris may continue to fall or shift. Delayed reaction increases exposure time within an unstable zone. Shock delays action, but hazards keep moving without pause. React immediately. Create distance first, and never stay inside an unstable zone. Outside a house, a ladder is set beneath an open window, and the entire setup shifts in a split second. Do not use a ladder on unstable ground or without proper anchoring. Ensure full stability before climbing. Inside a busy auto shop, a tire under tension suddenly snaps back with force. Keep all body parts and tools out of the line of tension when working with compressed or flexed components. Stored energy can release instantly. When a tire is compressed or flexed, it stores elastic energy within its structure as the material deforms under force. This stored energy remains contained until the tension is suddenly released, at which point the tire rapidly returns toward its original shape. The release converts stored energy into fast motion, generating a snapping force along the line of tension. Because this transition happens instantly, the movement is unpredictable and difficult to control, creating a high-risk zone directly in the path of release. Stored energy releases without warning. Tension turns into motion in an instant. Control the line of force, stay out of its path, and never assume it will hold. Inside a narrow garage, a tractor engine is hand-cranked near a brick wall, leaving no clearance for sudden reverse force. Do not use your body position or force in a direction that puts you directly in line with hard surfaces when manually starting machinery. Always maintain a safe clearance zone. On a roadside incline, an excavator crawls onto a small dump truck bed. The balance shifts instantly. Undersized or unsecured platforms cannot support shifting loads. Match capacity, align correctly, and control load transfer before moving equipment. As the excavator climbs onto the truck bed, its center of gravity shifts upward and forward, concentrating weight over a smaller support area. This change increases torque on the truck's suspension and reduces overall stability, especially if the platform is narrow or uneven. Any slight misalignment or movement can push the center of gravity beyond the support base, triggering a tipping moment. Once this balance is lost, gravity and the machine's mass combine to accelerate the instability, making recovery nearly impossible. Heavy machines don't forgive unstable setups. Mass turns small errors into instant loss of control. Match capacity, secure the platform, and verify balance before every movement. At a loading ramp, a truck bed blocks rear visibility, while movement builds in the blind zone behind it. Do not stand in the direct path or blind zone of a moving vehicle or loading platform. Always maintain a clear escape path and safe position. At a night construction site, an elevated lift operates at height. When instability shifts the center of gravity past its balance point, causing a sudden overturn. Never rely on elevated equipment stability without verifying ground conditions, load limits, and secure setup. Elevated lifts raise the center of gravity significantly above the base, making the entire system more sensitive to even small imbalances. Uneven ground, shifting loads, or sudden movement can push the center of gravity outside the support area. Once this happens, gravity creates a tipping force that increases rapidly with height and weight. Because the lift is already elevated, the leverage effect amplifies the instability, causing a fast and uncontrollable overturn once the balance point is crossed. Elevation reduces stability the moment the center of gravity rises. Verify ground, load, and balance first, or the system will overturn without warning. On a drilling floor, rotating equipment spins at full speed. Then the motion suddenly redirects sideways within its operating radius. Stay clear of the operating radius of rotating or energized equipment. Maintain a strict exclusion zone at all times. On a loading ramp, a skid steer ascends a trailer at an angle, shifting its center of gravity outside the wheelbase and tipping sideways instantly. Do not operate or load compact equipment on uneven ramps or unstable surfaces without proper alignment, traction, and load balance control. As the skid steer ascends at an angle, its center of gravity shifts toward the downhill side, reducing the effective support area of the wheelbase. This uneven distribution of weight creates a lateral tipping force that increases with both slope and elevation. Limited traction on the ramp can further reduce control, allowing small movements to escalate quickly. Once the center of gravity moves beyond the machine's base of support, gravity takes over, causing a rapid sideways tipping motion that is difficult to recover from. Angles turn control into instability faster than expected. Align the machine, secure the path, and don't move until stability is guaranteed. Inside a busy workshop, an unsecured gas cylinder near active equipment suddenly converts stored energy into rapid, uncontrolled movement. Secure gas cylinders at all times. Use chains, caps, and stable positioning to prevent uncontrolled movement. Inside a renovation site, a large floor tile under installation receives uneven force, causing a sudden lateral shift and loss of stability. Do not apply force on unsecured tiles without stable positioning. Maintain controlled posture and support when setting materials. During installation, large tiles rest on a thin, low-friction adhesive layer before they are fully set, making them highly unstable. When uneven force is applied, the tile can shift laterally or tilt because there is minimal resistance holding it in place. The smooth surface beneath reduces friction further, allowing sudden movement with very little warning. Once the tile begins to move, its weight and size amplify the instability, making it difficult to regain control and increasing the risk of a rapid shift or collapse. Unsecured tiles move the moment force is applied. Instability reacts instantly. Stabilize before pressure, or the surface will shift faster than you can recover. Inside a storage area, a heavy load is moved across a floor when the surface fails under the weight, collapsing without warning. Do not assume flooring can support heavy loads. Verify surface strength before moving weight across it. In a kitchen workspace, a large pressure cooker builds internal pressure near a wall. Then the containment suddenly fails without warning. Operate and open pressurized equipment only after confirming full pressure release and system integrity. Control energy before interaction. Pressurized vessels like pressure cookers store energy as steam builds inside a sealed space, increasing internal pressure with rising temperature. This compressed steam holds significant stored energy, even when there are no visible signs of danger. If the seal fails or is opened, prematurely, the pressure rapidly equalizes, causing the steam to expand instantly. This expansion releases energy in all directions, generating a powerful outward force that can displace nearby objects and rapidly expand the hazard zone. Pressure builds silently. Release happens fast. Confirm zero energy, control the system, and never trust a sealed vessel without verification. Inside a room, multiple workers hold a heavy overhead beam in place by hand. Then one shift changes everything. Do not rely on manual holding for heavy overhead loads. Always use proper supports, bracing, or lifting equipment. In a store aisle, a small ladder shifts beneath stacked glass bottles. Then the balance point gives way instantly. Do not use unstable ladders or overreach at height. Maintain three-point contact and ensure secure footing before elevation. Shifting body weight beyond the ladder's base moves the center of gravity outside its support area, causing tipping. The sudden loss of balance transfers force into nearby objects, triggering cascading instability. Height amplifies instability. Small shifts become system-wide failures. Control your base, control your reach, or the entire setup will collapse around you. On a quiet street, a large metal gate is pulled closed. Then it suddenly loses stability and collapses without warning. Do not operate large gates without ensuring hinges, tracks, and supports are secure. Assume failure if stability is compromised. A reversing vehicle enters an active roadway. An approaching truck continues forward with significant momentum, reducing available stopping distance as the gap closes. Along the roadside, a pressurized gas tanker releases vapor under pressure. The expanding cloud spreads outward, dispersing quickly through the surrounding space. Never approach or remain near an active gas release. Immediately create distance and move upwind. On an excavation site, an excavator applies force against a boundary wall. Load transfers into the structure until its capacity is exceeded and stability fails. Always operate excavators strictly within designated boundaries. Do not extend or apply force beyond defined work zones. At a loading bay, stacked wood sheets sit inside and outside a trailer. Then one section shift, redistributing the load and moving the center of gravity beyond stable support. Never load or unload materials without securing both ends. Always stabilize the entire load before handling. A trailer passes beneath low power lines as metal wires are lifted for clearance, reducing the gap and increasing exposure to energized voltage. Never attempt to move or interfere with overhead power lines. Only authorized utility control is safe. In a tight loading area, a reversing truck and a moving conveyor create a closing gap as the space between them reduces rapidly. Do not position or allow access between moving equipment. Always establish and respect exclusion zones. In a cluttered scrapyard, a cutting tool meets a sealed acetylene cylinder, triggering a hidden volatile reaction. Never, ever cut heat or tamper with pressurized gas cylinders. Treat them as explosive hazards at all times. A stacked load of scrap metal is partially supported on a trailer. When one section shifts, load distribution changes and motion transfers across the entire stack. Never offload scrap metal in an uncontrolled or unstable way. Always use proper handling methods and stable positioning. At a facility entrance, a heavy metal gate begins to move. Then its support or restraint fails, allowing the structure to move uncontrolled. Never ever operate or stand near unsecured gates. Ensure all structures are properly fixed and controlled before use. Inside a workshop, a large tire is handled in a tight space. Then, in a split second, built-up pressure releases, driving sudden movement as stored energy converts into force. Do not handle or interfere with pressurized tires without proper tools, restraints, and controlled procedures. High above the ground, a narrow ladder is positioned near a live transformer. Loss of stable contact during descent removes support, allowing gravity to drive rapid downward motion. Use proper fall protection and maintain 3 points of contact when descending from height, ensuring the ladder and footing remain stable at all times. Towering stacks of tightly packed pallets stand like solid walls until a moving machine transfers force into the structure, shifting the load and triggering a cascading collapse. Operate machinery with clear buffer zones around stacked materials. Avoid driving into or too close to tall, unsecured loads that can shift and collapse. A crane extends over uneven ground, pushing its reach further under load. Then the center of gravity shifts beyond its support base, initiating forward tipping. Respect load limits and lifting geometry at all times. Keep lifts within rated capacity and ensure stable ground support before extending or swinging a load. A conveyor line runs under supervision, then from behind, a heavy pallet begins rolling forward, closing the gap toward the edge as momentum carries it along. Stay clear of active conveyor paths and keep safe distance from moving loads. Always control and isolate movement before entering the area. Inside an industrial workshop, a wheel loader carries an oversized load toward a processing line. Then the center of gravity shifts beyond its support base, initiating a tipping motion. Never, ever exceed a loader's rated capacity. Keep loads low, centered, and balanced to maintain the center of gravity within the stability zone. A long metal rod is carried along a narrow path beneath overhead power lines. Then the gap reduces and voltage bridges the air, creating an electrical arc. Maintain safe clearance from overhead power lines and avoid carrying conductive materials near energized systems. A kitchen counter is used as a step. Unstable support reduces contact stability, and the center of mass shifts beyond control in an instant. Do not use unstable surfaces like tables, stools, or containers as stepping platforms. Use proper, secure footing. A workshop entrance becomes a blind impact zone. Limited visibility meets a fast-moving bike as distance closes rapidly. Never position yourself or work directly in open traffic paths. Establish barriers and controlled zones. A moving motorcycle carries momentum proportional to its speed and mass, making sudden stops or direction changes limited. Without separation, that momentum transfers instantly into anything in its path. Momentum doesn't stop for blind spots, separate paths, or the hazard enters your space. Inside a rolling mill, a cobbling steel line loses control. Stored tension releases, driving the material into rapid whipping motion along its path. Avoid standing within the path of tensioned or moving material. Maintain safe distance and use shielding to stay outside the line of force. At a waste pit edge, a bin tips forward. Its center of gravity shifts, pulling force toward the boundary where support ends. Do not rely on body weight to control a load near an open edge. Use stable footing and controlled methods. As the bin tips, its center of gravity shifts forward, pulling force toward the edge. On a low friction surface, even a small imbalance turns into an uncontrolled forward motion. Forward weight pulls faster than footing holds. Control the load or step away from the edge. A moving forklift inches forward inside a busy loading area. Contact with a stacked pallet transfers force, and the load shifts beyond stability. Never, ever turn your back on moving machinery. Always maintain visual awareness and keep a safe distance from active equipment zones. A round wood piece is pushed across a spinning table, saw blade, then the edge binds, and rotational force redirects the material along the blade path instantly. Never use freehand curved cuts on a table saw. Use proper jigs or the correct tool for the cut. A table saw blade is engineered for straight, consistent feed paths. When a curved piece is rotated into the blade, the contact point constantly shifts, creating uneven resistance and loss of control. That shifting contact can cause the wood to bind against the blade teeth. Once binding occurs, the blade's rotational force is redirected into a rapid kickback, accelerating the piece unpredictably. Curved cuts break control fast. Use the right tool or expect kickback. A loose overhead line hangs across a wet street, then tension suddenly increases, driving the line into rapid motion along its path. Never, ever assume a slack or hanging line is safe. Tension can change instantly and without warning. A suspended steel coil swings under a crane. Then its path enters a blind zone as momentum carries it forward. Never turn your back inside the operating zone of suspended or moving loads. A suspended coil behaves like a pendulum, carrying mass and momentum while hanging from the crane hook. Any slight movement, rotation, or positioning change introduces swing, especially when the load is not perfectly stabilized. When that moving mass enters a blind zone, its momentum continues uninterrupted. With no visual correction or spatial awareness, the load's path remains fixed, turning stored motion into direct force against anything in its trajectory. Moving loads don't stop for blind zones. If it's in motion, its path continues. A heavy tire is struck to force it into place, then a sudden ignition converts the buildup into a rapid pressure release. Do not apply force or impact to a tire while introducing heat or working near flammable conditions. Inside a CNC shop, a machine runs smoothly until a tiny fragment breaks free and is accelerated at high speed, changing direction as it strikes internal surfaces. Never assume contained machines eliminate projectile hazards. Always treat cutting. Operations as potential energy release zones. CNC machines operate with rotating tools at extremely high speeds, generating significant kinetic energy at the cutting interface. When a tool contacts metal, stresses build rapidly, and if a fragment breaks loose, whether from the tool, workpiece, or chip, it can be accelerated outward at high velocity. Inside the enclosure, fragments can strike hard internal surfaces and ricochet, changing direction unpredictably while retaining much of their energy. If any opening, gap, or weak barrier exists, that energy can escape the machine boundary, turning a small piece of metal into a fast-moving projectile. Small fragments carry high energy. Containment matters. Distance still protects. On a street-side work area, construction activity appears routine. Then an unsecured wheelbarrow loses support at height, and gravity drives it downward instantly. Do not leave tools or equipment unsecured at height. Gravity will turn them into falling hazards instantly. A vehicle is elevated on a hydraulic lift. When load balance is lost, the center of gravity moves outside the support zone, allowing gravity to initiate downward motion. Never work beneath or around a lifted vehicle without confirming stable load balance, locked lift arms, and proper support points. A vehicle lift relies on balanced load distribution across its contact points. If the center of gravity shifts outside that support polygon, even slightly, the system becomes unstable, allowing gravity to take over instantly. Hydraulic lifts also depend on mechanical locks and structural integrity, not just fluid pressure. Any misplacement, uneven weight, or failure to engage safety locks can result in sudden energy release, causing the vehicle to tip or fall without gradual warning. If the load isn't locked, it's not secure. Gravity acts instantly. Verify every support. In an open warehouse yard, a forklift moves through a shared work zone. Then its path intersects a blind spot as distance closes rapidly. Do not operate or walk around a forklift without maintaining clear visibility zones and strict separation between pedestrians and moving equipment. Along a narrow building side walkway, the path below appears clear. Then a piece of wood loses restraint above, and gravity drives it downward instantly. Never leave materials unsecured at height. Anything placed above ground level must be properly restrained or contained to prevent falling hazards. Objects at height store gravitational potential energy, which rapidly converts into kinetic energy as they fall. Even lightweight materials can generate significant impact force over a short drop due to acceleration under gravity. Without barriers like toe boards, edge protection, or secured stacking, vibrations, wind, or slight movement can easily dislodge materials into the drop zone below. Additionally, falling objects often do not travel in perfectly vertical paths. What's above will move if it's not secured. Control it, or gravity will. Inside a cluttered workshop filled with stacked lumber and active machinery, operations run as usual until a fault energizes the machine frame and current discharges through the structure. Never operate or approach equipment with unverified electrical integrity. Always isolate, ground, and inspect before contact. At a busy fuel station yard, a gas tanker maneuvers across wet concrete. Reduced traction limits control, and momentum carries it beyond its intended path. Never enter or remain within the movement zone of heavy vehicles. Always maintain clear separation and controlled traffic paths. Heavy vehicles, like tankers, carry enormous mass, and once in motion, their momentum makes sudden stopping or redirection extremely difficult. Limited visibility, turning radius, and surface conditions like water or oil reduce control, turning the vehicle into a high-force moving hazard within seconds. Mass in motion doesn't stop on demand. If it's moving, its path defines the hazard. Inside a warehouse aisle lined with stacked pallets and chemical drums, a single barrel tips, its center of gravity shifts beyond its base, and gravity drives it into motion instantly. Never handle heavy drums without proper control methods. Use mechanical aids and secure positioning at all times. Beside a parked car stacked with long bamboo, a small stool is used to reach the top. Then a shift in load and position moves the center of gravity beyond the narrow base of support. Never, ever stand on unstable or improvised platforms when handling elevated loads. Use proper ladders or secured access equipment. A small stool has a very limited base of support, meaning the center of gravity must remain precisely within a narrow footprint to stay stable. When a person stands on it while reaching upward, their center of mass rises significantly, reducing overall stability and increasing the likelihood of tipping. Handling long bamboo adds another layer of instability. The extended length acts like a lever, amplifying even small movements into larger shifts in force. As the bamboo is lifted or repositioned, its weight distribution changes dynamically, creating lateral forces that push the system off balance. If your footing isn't stable, neither is the load. Use the right platform before reaching higher. Inside a warehouse aisle, a forklift raises a heavy load near a fixed surface. Then the gap narrows rapidly as the load moves into the space. Never, ever stand within the operating zone of a forklift mast or load. Maintain a safe distance from all moving components and pinch points. On a roadside work zone, a crane lifts a long pole upward. Clearance reduces and voltage bridges the air gap from the overhead power lines. Never bring any load, equipment, or conductive material near overhead power lines. Maintain minimum clearance distances at all times. Overhead power lines carry high voltage, often in the range of thousands of volts, creating strong electric fields around them. Direct contact is not required for danger. When a conductive object like a metal pole or crane boom enters this field, electricity can arc across the air gap if the voltage is high enough. This phenomenon, known as dielectric breakdown, allows current to jump through the air, instantly energizing the object and anything connected to it. Once energized, the entire system, including the crane, load, and ground contact points, can become part of an electrical path. Electricity doesn't need contact. It only needs distance to fail. If it's near power lines, it's already too close. A forklift moves a stacked load across a warehouse lane. Its size blocks visibility, creating a blind zone behind the moving mass. Never walk or stand on the path of moving equipment or suspended loads. Stay clear of blind zones at all times. A loaded pickup rolls across uneven ground while loose material in the bed silently shifts its center of gravity. Never transport unsecured loads on uneven terrain. Stability depends on controlled weight distribution. When a vehicle carries a heavy, loose load like sand or debris, the center of gravity is not fixed. It shifts dynamically with motion. On uneven or sloped terrain, this shifting mass amplifies lateral forces, especially during turns or sudden changes in direction. As the load moves, it transfers weight unevenly across the vehicle's suspension, reducing tire grip and stability on one side. If the shifting load exceeds the vehicle's stability threshold, it creates a tipping moment where gravitational force pulls the system beyond its balance point. Once that tipping angle is crossed, recovery becomes nearly impossible due to momentum and ground irregularities, causing the vehicle to roll or collapse under its own redistributed mass. Unsecured loads move with the vehicle, control the load, or it controls stability. A flatbed truck sits still while a loose wooden plank shifts at its contact point and pivots under load like a lever. Never stand over or straddle unsecured materials. Stored energy and shifting contact points can release without warning. On a work site, an object drops from above. Gravity drives it along a direct path into the space below, where protection is critical. Always wear appropriate head protection in active work zones. Overhead hazards can occur without warning. Objects falling from height gain speed due to gravity, increasing their impact force upon contact. Even relatively small materials can carry significant energy when dropped, especially from elevated structures or stacked positions. A hard hat works by absorbing and dispersing that impact energy across its shell and suspension system, reducing the force transmitted downward. This energy distribution significantly lowers the severity of the impact from falling objects. Hazards from above don't give warnings before they fall. The right gear turns a direct hit into a survivable moment. Under a raised vehicle, a heavy component shifts, support is lost, and gravity drives it straight downward. Never rely on a single support when working beneath heavy components. Always secure and stabilize with proper redundancy. High above the rig floor, a massive top drive loses its connection, support fails, and gravity drives it straight downward. Never stand beneath suspended or elevated equipment. Always maintain a clear exclusion zone below overhead loads. A suspended top drive carries immense weight and stored gravitational energy while held in position. If the lifting system, connection point, or mechanical restraint fails, that energy converts instantly into downward force, accelerating the equipment toward the ground. The greater the mass and height, the more force is generated on impact, leaving no time to react once motion begins. Only proper securing systems and strict no-go zones can eliminate exposure to this hazard. Anything above you is a potential falling load. Distance defines safety. Stay out of the drop zone. A spooling machine spins at full speed, then contact transfers rotational force, drawing material into motion along the rotating path. Never get close to unguarded rotating equipment. Keep a safe distance and ensure proper guarding is in place. A weakened wall is struck. Internal stresses release, sending fragments outward and downward from above. Never work beneath unstable structures without head protection. Always wear a hard hat in demolition or impact zones. When structural material is disturbed, internal stresses are suddenly released, causing fragments to break free and travel outward and downward under gravity. These pieces accelerate quickly, turning even small debris into high-impact projectiles. Without a protective barrier, the head becomes directly exposed to falling energy that cannot be avoided once the collapse begins. Falling debris follows force and gravity. Head protection reduces exposure. Use it. In a car workshop, routine work is underway. Then a moving vehicle enters from a blind side, crossing into the workspace path. Never ever assume a workspace is isolated. Always stay alert and maintain clear escape paths. In a busy industrial setup, a pressurized system operates normally, then containment fails, releasing stored energy outward in an instant. Never underestimate stored energy or pressurized systems. Always maintain safe distance and proper controls. A cutting blade bites into dense debris on a hillside. Uneven resistance redirects force, ejecting material at high speed. Never operate cutting tools without full eye and face protection. Always assume debris will eject at high speed directly toward the operator. Rotating cutting tools store kinetic energy and transfer it instantly into the material being cut, creating high-velocity fragments when resistance is uneven. When the blade strikes dense or irregular surfaces, it generates unpredictable reaction forces that can eject debris in multiple directions that can easily cause bodily harm. Cutting energy doesn't stay in one direction. Fragments can eject at speed. Use protection. A routine check at an electrical panel, then a fault forms and electrical energy discharges outward as current escapes its intended path. Never work on live electrical systems without proper isolation and protective gear. A highway maintenance crew works ahead. Without advance warning or buffer zones, a fast-moving truck approaches and rapidly closes the available distance. Never, ever begin roadway work without proper advance warning systems. Set up clear signage, cones, and buffer zones long before the work area. At highway speeds, vehicles carry massive kinetic energy, and stopping distance depends on both reaction time and braking distance. Without early visual cues, drivers cannot detect hazards in time to decelerate safely. When no signage or tapering zone is provided, the transition from open road to work zone becomes abrupt, forcing sudden braking or impact. The vehicle's forward momentum continues until sufficient opposing force is applied, often too late within short distances. Visibility defines reaction time. No warning means no stopping distance. On a rooftop build, woodwork looks routine. Then an attempt to move exposes misplacement and careless setup. Never carry out overhead hammering or fastening when materials below are unsecured in the same line. Always isolate and stabilize the work area. Inside a busy auto workshop, a routine tire change looks harmless until internal pressure releases and drives the wheel into sudden motion. Never ever position your body directly in line with a tire under pressure. Control and distance are your only protection. Compressed air inside a tire acts like a stored energy system. As pressure builds during inflation, energy accumulates within the confined volume of the tire, pressing outward equally in all directions. However, the system becomes unstable if the tire bead is not properly seated on the rim or if there is any misalignment or damage. At that moment, the pressure is no longer evenly distributed. When a failure occurs, such as a bead slip, sudden seal break, or structural shift, the energy is released almost instantly. This release can cause the wheel to jump, spin, or eject parts with high velocity. Hidden pressure holds real force. Control the energy, or keep your distance. On a city street below a residential building, everything moves normally. Then an object above loses control and gravity drives it downward into the space below. Never, ever dispose of materials from height without a controlled drop zone. Falling objects create invisible danger below. Inside a storage room lined with tall metal shelves, one small pull shifts the structure, then momentum transfers from one unit to the next in a cascading chain reaction. Never leave tall shelving units unsecured. Unstable structures can tip and cascade without warning. Tall shelving units have a naturally high center of gravity, especially when loaded unevenly or with heavier items placed higher up. When force is applied, like pulling or climbing, the structure begins to pivot around its base. If the center of mass shifts beyond the support footprint, gravity takes over and tipping becomes unavoidable. Once one unit starts to fall, it transfers force into adjacent shelves. This creates a domino effect, where each structure adds momentum to the next. The combined mass increases the overall kinetic energy, making the collapse faster and harder to stop. Height increases instability without anchoring. Secure it, or it will move. A stack of plastic buckets is used as a platform. Each shift in weight deforms the base and moves the center of mass toward instability. Never use unstable, flexible objects as a working platform. Always use equipment designed to support weight and maintain balance. On a narrow, elevated work platform, one step onto stacked pipes causes the surface to roll as contact points shift under load. Never walk or stand on unsecured round materials. Rolling surfaces can shift instantly and remove all footing. Cylindrical objects like pipes are inherently unstable under load because they convert vertical force into rotational motion. When a person steps onto them, their weight applies downward pressure. But because the contact surface is curved, that force is partially redirected sideways, causing the pipes to roll. Unlike flat surfaces, there is no stable plane, only continuous movement. As multiple pipes are stacked together, they behave like a loosely coupled system. When one pipe begins to rotate, it transfers motion to adjacent pipes through contact friction. This creates a chain reaction where the entire bundle starts shifting. If it rolls, it's not a stable surface. Secure it or stay off it. At a busy loading dock, a forklift rolls toward a stationary pallet. Movement reduces the gap until surfaces close into a compression zone. Never allow any presence within the gap between a moving forklift and a fixed object. The compression zone forms instantly and cannot be reversed in time. On an active train platform, a long metal pole is raised near overhead lines. Clearance closes, the air ionizes, and an arc bridges the gap instantly. Never bring conductive objects near overhead railway lines. High voltage can arc without direct contact and discharge instantly. Railway overhead lines carry extremely high voltage, often in the range of 15,000 to 25,000 volts or more. This electrical energy is constantly present and does not require physical contact to become hazardous. When a conductive object, such as a metal pole, is brought close enough, it can bridge the gap through a phenomenon called electrical arcing. Electrical arcing occurs when the electric field strength between the energized line and the object becomes strong enough to ionize the surrounding air. Normally, air acts as an insulator, but under high voltage, it breaks down and becomes conductive. This allows current to jump through the air, forming a visible arc that rapidly transfers energy. High voltage crosses air when distance is too small. Maintain clearance always. Don't forget to share what you learned today in the comments. Your insight could save a life. Take care.